This is my Sovol SV01, and it is a damn good 3D printer. But it could be even better. One of the things people complain about with 3D printers is how freaking loud the stepper motors can be. Whenever I'm down here printing, it's down here, and then my dogs think something's down here and they all start freaking out. Today, we're gonna put a new main board, and this has silent stepper motor drivers that will make it quieter. That's what we're gonna find out. The other thing people have to deal with 3D printers is leveling the bed. And I know there's people out there who say, I leveled my bed once 27 years ago and I haven't had to level it since. I don't know what's wrong with you having to re-level your bed every time you print. But if you're a normal person, maybe you have to re-level your bed more often than you'd like. And this BLtouch sensor is going to automate the bed leveling process for us. That's what we're going to do in this video. I'm Joshua Bardwell. You're going to learn something today. So the first thing I want to do is replace the main board, and it should be really easy because this upgraded main board from Sovol is just a drop-in replacement. It should be just as simple as unplug all the motors and all the other stuff, replace it, plug them back in, and be good to go. But before we do that, I want to do a little recording of how loud the stepper motors are so we have an objective way of comparing how much quieter they've gotten. We'll start this recording, and I guess I'm going to put it down here on the table because a lot of times there's like resonance in the table and stuff that amplifies the sound of the stepper motors. Okay. Now on the Sovol, we can get at the main board from the bottom. I've taken the spool of filament off the top, and I'm just going to tip this over to the side. And this is the bottom cover here, and I've actually already removed the screws some time ago for a different project, and I never reinstalled it because I knew I was going to be putting this board in. Now, it seems to me like the easiest thing to do is going to be to pull out the parts one at a time and just transfer them over and plug them in to the new main board. We're definitely going to want to make sure we get these exactly right, otherwise we're going to get ourselves in trouble. Okay, here we go. Looks like some of these have been glued, although the glue doesn't seem to be quite holding. I have heard about some people doing this who had a little trouble getting the glued connectors off. They don't seem to be having any trouble though. Oh yeah, there's a little glue on there. You can just break that glue off. Whenever I've got a situation like this where I have to plug stuff in exactly how it was, this to me seems like the smartest way to do it. Just one at a time. So I really should be identifying clearly the plug that I'm going to be plugging into before I unplug the plug that I unplug. Well, these are a lot more secure. Get that glue off of there. And I think for this part, we're going to want to just go ahead and get this guy unmounted. We've nearly done it all. This is a 2mm driver. We got these two ribbon cables for the screen, and then it looks like just the power. Another thing that surprised me is I've used these screw terminals before. Maybe I've been using them wrong all this time. The wire goes up against the top, and then the screw pulls this part to cinch it up. I've always done this in the past with a kind of screw terminal where the screw comes down and the screw presses down on the wire. So this is a little different than I've done it before, but no big deal. Definitely going to want to get the hot end good and snug. A lot of power flowing through there. The second one is negative and the first one is positive. When I wasn't sure about where that plug went, it was really nice to have this camera having taken a picture of the board before I started screwing with it. That might be a good tip for you. Just pull out your cell phone, get it well lit, and take a clear photo of where all the plugs go, so that if you're ever, like you can check at the end of the transfer and make sure that you've done it correctly. That's marked on the bottom of the board, but it's not as easy to see on this board. Just look on this board, it's the same. Gonna want to make sure those are fully inserted. Don't screw around with these power wires. Okay, completely transferred over. Let's reinstall the board. Last chance before the smoke comes out. Moment of truth. Seems good. Now let's see how much quieter it is at driving the servos. Oh. They're not kidding when they say silent. It's totally silent. Holy crap. Wow. Oh my goodness. That is really something. Wow. Okay. That's totally worth it. Now the next thing I'm going to need to do is flash the firmware on the main board, because this one at least doesn't appear to have shipped with Marlin 2.0. I've got another video about how to update your Sovol to Marlin 2.0. It's really easy. You don't have to compile anything. Someone has done the work for us. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So link to that video down in the video description. But you're going to need to decide which version of Marlin 2.0 you want to flash. Are you going to flash the regular version or the version with BLtouch? Because that's the next thing we're going to do. And this video has been short enough that I'm just going to stick it in this video. We're going to go ahead and install this BLtouch sensor that automatically levels the bed. In other words, you don't have to screw around with all this nonsense. It'll automatically do a mesh bed leveling before every print if you want, and get that first layer perfect every time. At least that's what some people say. But then other people say, it's just another thing to break. It's not worth the trouble. We're going to find out after, I'll make another video in a couple weeks and see if it was worth it. Let's get on with the install. The BLtouch is going to come from Sovol with this cable. The 3-pin servo plug is going to go on pin D11, and the yellow wire is going to face towards the power supply. Pin D11 is the second pin header row from the top on this little header right here. The display ribbon cables are a little bit in the way. Yeah, I believe that's correct. Yellow wire facing the power supply. One row of pins is visible just above here. And then this one is going to replace the Z-axis limit switch, which is this one right here. We're going to go out the left side down here. And with it coming out the left side here, I can just follow this path right over to, follow the same path as the power wires for the hot end and so forth. So we'll dress that later once we're sure it's working correctly, but that's basically the routing of the cable. This bracket that comes with the BLtouch sensor has two sets of screw holes. One is threaded and the other is elongated. There have been some reports of people receiving this bracket without the threaded holes actually having threads tapped into them, and those people solved that problem by 3D printing a little adapter. Hopefully by the time you're seeing this video, that problem has been solved and nobody watching this video should have that problem. But if you do get this bracket and for some reason it's not tapped, you're not alone. Before we install the sensor on the bracket, I'm going to go ahead and plug in the cable because it may be a little hard to plug in. It's going to be turned around to the back side when all's said and done. And how the hell is this thing going to go? We may need to just unplug the X-axis stepper motor plug to get that out of the way. So that's how it's going to get installed, with the cable coming out the back. And there are these two screw holes, and that is where the sensor is going to install. It's pretty tight. Like, it's got enough slack to go up or down, but this motor's so in the way that it can't really go anywhere. Yeah, boy. That's just right up against the stepper. Now at this point the BLtouch is installed pretty much how Sovol says to do it, but there are some problems. For one thing, the screws seem to stick out so far up the top of the bracket, that's a sentence, that they push into the stepper motor and just make the bracket be all kind of askew. The other problem, and I haven't verified this for myself, but people have, when people heard I was going to do this install, I got a couple messages saying that the placement of the bracket puts the BLtouch sensor slightly too high. And that means that as the gantry comes down, the nozzle will actually crash into the bed before the BLtouch triggers and says, whoa, stop. So you actually can solve both of these problems by using a couple of these washers. These are M3 washers, and I happen to have some around, and if you don't, I don't know what you're going to do. Probably 3D print, haha, a little shim or something. But I'm going to use these washers, and I'm going to sort of solve both of those problems all at once. So I'm just going to take enough washers to shim this out a little bit. I'll count them, 1, 2, 3. 3. I think maybe 4 washers would be pretty good. And I would end up with almost no, 4 of these washers, which I think the washers are a 0.5 millimeter each, so that's 2 millimeter shim. And that's going to take basically, So now the screw doesn't protrude through at all, and it won't press into the stepper motor. I've done it wrong again. I've installed it upside down. I'm a dumbass. All right, so now it's installed with the spacers, and the screws are just barely protruding through. Let's see how that works. Oh yeah, that's way better. That's way better. I mean, it's not all cockeyed anymore. Yeah. So then we will plug this back in and route this cable. Just route this cable around here with zip ties. The next thing we need to do is flash the firmware to the board. The best firmware to flash, in my opinion, is coptertech.de. There'll be a link to this down in the video description. There are a couple other firmwares you can flash, but the nice thing about this one is that Coptertech builds it specifically for the Sovol SV01. It is just ready to... Oh! How about that? You added me to the page. That's amazing. Thank you. I legit did not know that. That's awesome. Oh, here we go. Download. And we're going to choose our language. So my language is English. So I'll choose the suffix EN. And this is Marlin Sovol BLtouch. So I have a BLtouch, so I'm going to download the BLtouch hex file. If you don't have BLtouch, you're going to download just the non-BLtouch one. Oh, and I have the silent board. That's important. So I need silent board, BLtouch, EN. Got it. That's the correct one for me. Then we're going to start Cura and plug in USB. And once Sovol's running, I'll make sure the Sovol SV01 is selected. That's actually the only printer I have on this laptop. And hit Manage Printers. And then Update Firmware. And then I will hit Upload Custom Firmware. Let's see, Marlin, Sovol, Silent Board, BLtouch. Oh, I still got some leftover hex files from previous times when I did this. We'll let that run. And when that's done, we will proceed to the next step. Now, the other thing we need to do is download this Gcode file and print it. And it's not actually anything we're going to print. It just resets the, I think it resets the EEPROM. And you can see that here when I start the printer up. First of all, you can see Sovol modified by Coptertech, so the flash was successful. But after it starts up, we get this error EEPROM version. So I think this is going to fix that. We're going to go to Print from Media and print factory reset.gcode. Okay, that's done. Now, unfortunately, we are not done yet. The next thing we need to do is tell the printer what our Z offset is going to be. Basically, we need to tell it the relationship between the BLtouch sensor and the actual print nozzle. And that lets it know just how far up or down it should move the gantry to get the exact right spacing from the board. And if you do this wrong, you're going to screw up your bed, because it's going to just lower it down and it's going to think, oh, we're not quite there yet. And it's actually going to be grinding the nozzle into the bed. So let's try to get this right. And the first thing I need to do is I need to get my old Z-axis limit switch out of here. It's not being used anymore. We're going to just take it out of here. Now at this point, I want to give this a test run and just confirm that it's basically working right before I put my precious print bed at stake. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the menu and auto home. But I'm going to hold out an object underneath the BLtouch sensor, and as it starts to lower the gantry, I'm going to just let it touch this object and it should stop. Let's see how that goes. Okay, and it's coming down. Okay, it stopped its downward motion. Actually, it backs up and then it tries again and double checks, but everything worked correctly. Now I feel reasonably confident that we're not going to F up my bed. The other thing I want to check is that when extended, the BLtouch sensor is below the level of the nozzle, because if you think about it, if the BLtouch sensor is above the level of the nozzle, then the nozzle will crash first before the sensor gets triggered. And that shouldn't ever be the case if the brackets are correctly designed, etc., etc. But again, people have reached out to me and said that they had the experience that if you didn't shim it out with some washers, it would crash the nozzle. So we look pretty good in that case also. Now we're ready to actually set the Z offset. Actually, I take that back. Before you try to set the Z offset for the BLtouch, you should run a manual bed leveling. You should use the springs or whatever to get the bed as close to level as it could possibly be. The BLtouch is only there to correct for that last little bit. So if you haven't leveled your bed recently, maybe now's a good time to do it. Okay, let's do the Z offset. So now we're going to follow these instructions from Sovol. I'll put a link to them down in the video description if you want to use them as a reference. But the first thing to do is to go to Motion, Auto Home, and this time we're going to let it run. I guess at this point I could probably dress this cable and get it out of the way. I'm so nervous. It'll be fine. Whew. Okay, it was fine. Now what I want you to see here is that there is way, way more room there than we actually need. So the next thing to do is to get a handy dandy piece of paper, your handy dandy piece of paper that you keep around. You know, that one piece of paper that you keep just for this purpose, because I actually have one of those. And we are gonna go Motion, Move Axis, Move Z, Move, let's say we're gonna move, looks like we need to move more than 0.1 millimeters. We're gonna move 10 millimeters, and we're gonna start to lower this down until we get just that one paper's width of spacing, just like when you level the bed normally. So I just experienced a problem where I could not move the Z-axis any lower than the auto-detected 0 point, which of course is too high. We need to lower it down. And the reason for that is I'm gonna go into the menu and go Motion, Move Axis, and there's an option there, Soft End Stops. We wanna turn the Soft End Stops option off, and that'll let us go lower. So now I'm gonna go to Move Z, move 0.1 millimeters, and now I can lower the head down and just feel for it to begin dragging on the paper. There we go. All right, it looks like it's about 1.5 millimeters until it drags on the paper. A equals 1.5 millimeters, or technically negative 1.5 millimeters. Then we're gonna go to Configuration, Probe Z Offset, and in my case it's 0 because we're starting from scratch. So basically we're just gonna set the Z offset to the value that we derived in the last step, which is minus 1.5. Yeah, I think they're giving you some extra math here in case you already had a Z offset in place and now you want to adjust from there. But since we're starting from scratch, a fresh install, we're just going to start from 0. Finally, we're going to go into the menu and do Configuration, Store Settings. If you don't do that, these settings will be lost as soon as you power cycle, and that'll be bad. After we've got the Z offset saved, the next thing to do is to create the mesh. And the way you do that is you go into Motion, you go into Unified Bed Leveling, and the first thing you're going to do is Unified Bed Leveling is deactivated by default. Well, we don't want that. We want to activate it. So activate UBL, and then we're going to go to Step-by-Step UBL, and we're going to highlight Step 1, Build Cold Mesh, and we're going to build the cold mesh. Now this is going to take a minute. It's going to take several minutes actually. It's going to go to a 10 by 10 grid of points on your bed and measure how high or low the exact sort of individual wiggles and jiggles and hills and valleys of your bed. 10 by 10 mesh is 100 points. That's going to take, it takes maybe like 10 minutes. I haven't actually timed it. So now that the mesh is created, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go Configuration and Store Settings. I don't strictly speaking know if that's required, but it always seems like a good idea to me. And I'm going to go Motion, Unified Bed Leveling, and then go to Mesh Storage, and I'm going to choose Memory Slot 0 and Save Bed Mesh. The final step in all of this is to modify the start Gcode in your slicer to cause the printer to load this mesh information and use this mesh information, which I don't know about you, but I kind of thought it would be automatic, that once the mesh was there and a unified bed leveling was turned on, that it would all happen automatically. Apparently that's not true. Now this is the start Gcode that I have ended up with after doing a little bit of reading on the web and so forth. But I got to tell you, I can't 100% vouch for the fact that there aren't any mistakes in there. I will put this down in the video description and you are welcome to copy it if you want to. Basically, this stuff here is all from Sovol. That you should already have that. Then what I decided to do is heat the bed before we do any movements so that the bed is already hot at the time that we validate the mesh. Then begin heating the extruder. So the extruder, because the extruder takes a little while to heat up. So the whole time we're doing the mesh validation, the heater is already heating up. Then we're going to home. Then apparently homing turns off mesh leveling. So you have to manually turn it back on. Okay, fine. Then we load the mesh, and this is key here. If we do G29L0, that will load the mesh in slot 0, which is where we saved the mesh previously. You can also just do G29L and load the previously used mesh, but I decided to put the actual mesh slot number in, so I would always load the same mesh. I don't know why you would have more than one mesh, but maybe I'll learn about that later. Then finally we do G29J, which does a 3-point level, and basically if your bed, if you move your bed a little bit while you're removing a print and the springs compress a little bit and the bed isn't quite exactly level like it was before, but the surface of the bed, the mesh is still valid, you've just kind of tilted a little bit, this G29J will do a 3-point level before each print that detects any slight change in the tilt without running the entire 10 by 10 grid all over again. Finally, we wait for the bed and extruder to reach temp, and then this stuff is all standard stuff where you do the little 2 lines and begin printing. Well, folks, here's the last thing I want to show you just to prove how freaking effective this technique is. Here is a print that I did with universal bed leveling turned off. This is just how level my bed was before I started, and you can definitely see that the right side of the bed is high. And many people would say that you should fix this by getting your springs. This is not the kind of thing that bed leveling should be solving, and that might be true. But anyway, here is the exact same setup with automated bed leveling turned on. And you can see the BLtouch has just taken all the unevenness right freaking out and given me a nearly perfect print. Actually, it's not quite perfect. I'm having some adhesion problems, but that's not related to the BLtouch. There you go, folks. That's going to bring us to the end of this video. It has been a doozy, but I sure hope that you enjoyed following along. And at the end of this, I sure hope you have a wonderful printer that prints perfect first layers every freaking time. Or is it going to turn out that the BLtouch is more freaking trouble than it's worth and we should just level our bed? And I don't know. I'm on this great adventure with you. Thank you guys for coming along on this great adventure with me. I got a whole playlist. If you came across this video, I got a whole playlist of Sovol SV01 3D printing, Cura slicing. I'm not a 3D printer expert, but if you want to follow along on this journey with me, check out that playlist. Thank you guys so much for watching, and happy printing. What are you still doing here? The video's over. Do you watch all the videos all the way to the end? Wow, you are a super fan. Thank you. That actually helps the channel a lot when you watch the videos all the way to the end. YouTube loves that. You know what else YouTube loves? When you subscribe. Or when you join my Patreon for as little as $2 a month, or more if you feel like I've earned. Actually, YouTube doesn't like you to join my Patreon. They don't get a cut of that.